If you're listening, you probably feel that the future of medicine isn't just, finding new pills. It's about finding smarter ways to interact with our own biology. Today, we're diving into something that feels less like a new drug and more like, well, like a system upgrade for your immune system, specifically for healing. Our mission is to unpack some really fascinating research. It's from a team at Trinity College Dublin. They found a way to use just a tiny electrical current to essentially reprogram a key immune cell, one that can be a bit problematic sometimes.
Yeah, this is exciting stuff. It tackles a major issue in recovery and chronic disease.
Yeah.
How do you turn off that destructive inflammation and actively switch on repair?
Yeah.
We're talking about flipping the script on the macrophage cell. It's central to fighting infection, sure, but also to causing long-term damage if it gets stuck. And they're doing it with something as fundamental as electricity. It's a move from just treating symptoms to actually instructing the cells.
Exactly. And for you listening, this isn't just theory. If this approach works out clinically, it could genuinely change therapies for things like, say, diabetic ulcers, serious burns, even recovery after surgery. Anywhere where that uncontrolled inflammation really gums up the works and stops healing. So we need to get into what these cells actually are, how this electrical switch works physically, and, why this simple technique is seen as potentially revolutionary compared to typical drug approaches.
Okay, let's start with the main player here.
Yeah.
The macrophage. Think of macrophages as a type of specialized white blood cell. They're kind of the first responders, the utility players in your tissues. Their name literally means big eater. And their job, it's basically critical housekeeping.
Yeah.
So they gobble up pathogens, bacteria, viruses. They clear out dead or damaged cells after you get injured, super important. And they also act like signal towers. They call in other immune cells when needed. They're absolutely essential for that immediate defense and, crucially, for guiding the early steps of tissue repair.
Right. But here's the catch, isn't it? The really tricky part. This intense sort of dual nature they have. They kickstart healing by causing inflammation, which you need, initially, to clear debris and fight off any infection. But if they don't get the all-clear signal, they just keep going. They stay in attack mode. It's like, imagine a demolition crew after a fire. You need them, right? To knock down the burnt parts so builders can come in. But if that demolition crew just stays there, tearing things down aggressively long after their job's done, well, the builders can never actually start rebuilding.
That's a great analogy.
When macrophages get stuck in that destructive superinflammatory state, they actually make tissue damage worse. They cause that chronic simmering inflammation that's behind so many diseases.
Exactly right. That persistent, aggressive inflammation, that's the hallmark of conditions, from rheumatoid arthritis all the way to chronic wounds that just won't heal. And if drugs struggle to control this specific cell, and many do, because targeting immune pathways is complex, often has side effects elsewhere, then you're stuck. That inability to reliably switch the macrophage from demolish mode to rebuild mode is precisely why researchers, like Dr. Cindy O'Rourke in this study, started looking for a different way, a physical, non-drug way to gain control.
Okay, so if the big challenge is getting these cells to switch gears, stop fighting, start healing, how did the Trinity team actually pull it off? This team, led by Professor Aisling Dunn and Professor Michael Monahan, let's look at their method. What jumps out right away, I think, is that this wasn't just tested on, mouse cells in a dish. They went straight to using human macrophages, isolated from healthy donor blood. Big thanks to the Irish Blood Transfusion Board for that.
Yeah, that's huge.
It immediately makes the findings feel much more relevant for actual human therapies down the line, doesn't it? Less risk of it not translating from animals?
Absolutely. It significantly shortens that translational gap. So for the experiment itself, they needed a very controlled setup. They put these human macrophages inside a custom-designed bioreactor. This gadget let them deliver a really specific, low-level electrical current directly to the cells. Then they watched closely, not just how the cells behaved, but they looked deeper at the fundamental shifts in their gene expression. What genes were getting turned on or off?
Okay, so let's get into the biophysics a bit. When we say reprogramming with electricity, it sounds a bit sci-fi, but it's actual cell signaling, right?
It is. It's not magic. It's physics influencing biology. Cells, including macrophages, are incredibly sensitive to their local electrical environment. The currents likely affect the voltage difference across the cell membrane. Think of it like tiny electrical gradients. And changing those gradients influences key proteins in the membrane, like ion channels.
So applying the current is like subtly adjusting the cell's internal wiring, which then triggers a whole cascade of new instructions inside.
Precisely. You're changing that membrane potential. And that forces a switch in the cell's internal signaling pathways. And in this specific case, that forced switch led to three really big observable changes. These are the aha moments. First, they documented a really powerful shift away from inflammation. The cells entered an anti-inflammatory state. They saw less activity from inflammatory markers. These are the signaling molecules that basically act like the cell shouting, "Danger! Attack!" They fuel the fire. The cells just got quieter.
Okay, going quiet is good, reducing the noise. But that's not enough for healing itself, is it? You need positive action, too. What was the second major thing they saw once the cells calmed down?
The second finding was all about regeneration. The stimulated cells started expressing more genes that actively drive angiogenesis.
Angiogenesis. That's the growth of new blood vessels.
Exactly. New blood vessel growth. And this is critical, particularly if you think about chronic wounds, like in diabetic patients. In those kinds of injuries, blood vessels often just fail to regrow properly. The tissue starves for oxygen and nutrients, and it gets trapped, it can't heal. This electrical boost seems to directly address that bottleneck. It encourages those vital supply lines to rebuild.
Wow. So it's not just putting out the fire, it's actually starting to lay the foundations for reconstruction. And the third result, this sounds like it shows the macrophages really stepping up as like project managers for repair.
That's a perfect way to put it. The third and maybe most promising outcome was that the electrical stimulation significantly boosted the recruitment of local stem cells into the area. See, macrophages that are switched to repair mode don't just tidy up, they release specific growth factors. These act like homing beacons for the body's own stem cells and other repair mechanisms. So yes, they essentially turn these macrophages into highly effective, targeted construction managers, actively calling in the essential building materials needed for proper tissue regeneration.
So let's connect the dots for the listener. What does this big cellular shift, less inflammation, more blood vessels attracting stem cells, what does it actually mean if you're dealing with, say, a wound that just won't heal? The research team really highlights the immediate significance here. They point to some key advantages that make this electrical approach potentially much better than just using drugs.
Well, the primary advantage they stress is safety and control. Drug therapies often act systemically, right? They affect your whole body. That can sometimes suppress necessary immune functions elsewhere, leading to side effects. Electrical stimulation, however, can be highly localized, targeted right where you need it. As Professor Monahan put it, this method is considered relatively safe and easy in the scheme of therapeutic options, especially compared to introducing complex drugs that might need constant monitoring.
That makes sense. You're not trying to overpower biology with chemicals. You're kind of persuading it with physics, gently guiding it. And because the core result is boosting your body's own repair processes, just making your existing system work better, the potential applications seem huge. It could apply across a really wide range of injuries and inflammatory diseases.
Absolutely. And looking ahead, connecting this to the bigger picture, the next steps are all about refining that persuasion, making it even more precise. Professor Monahan mentioned exploring more advanced regimes of electrical stimulation.
Regimes? You mean like different patterns or frequencies of the current?
Exactly. Fine-tuning the intensity, the duration, maybe even the pulse patterns of the electricity. The goal is to generate the most powerful, most specific, and longest-lasting positive effects on these macrophages.
And I guess that ties directly into getting this out of the lab and into practical use, right? They're also looking at new materials and ways to actually deliver these electric fields. I'm picturing things like maybe smart bandages with tiny, flexible electrodes woven in, or perhaps even small implantable devices for deeper tissues.
That's precisely the direction. Things that can deliver that precise cellular instruction right at the site of injury or disease without being bulky or invasive. Portability and targeted efficacy are key. The findings they have so far, as they say, have yielded compelling effects in vitro, meaning it works beautifully in the lab setting with human cells. And they strongly believe this concept holds huge potential in a wide range of inflammatory diseases. It feels like we're moving towards a future where we don't just, manage the symptoms of chronic inflammation, but we might be able to actively direct the biological machinery of healing itself.
That really is a powerful takeaway. Electricity is something so fundamental, offering a novel, potentially safer, and highly efficient way to nudge the body's own healers, the macrophages, away from causing damage and towards active, targeted repair. We're talking about real bioengineering, but using simple, applied physics.
And the main challenge now, as we discussed, is translating that lab success into practical methods that achieve those precise, prolonged effects in patients. Which leads to a really interesting question for future research and maybe something for you, the listener. to think about. Given this clear success in human cells, how quickly could integrating these new materials and advanced stimulation techniques fundamentally change the timeline for healing? Could recovery from chronic wounds or major inflammatory conditions shift from taking months or even years, potentially down to just weeks? That's the hope.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other biological switches are just waiting inside our cells, ready to be flipped by something as basic, as universal as an electrical current? That's definitely a powerful thought to leave you with, considering the future of regulating life right down at the cellular level.